October 7, 1942. Kaiser Shipbuilding Yard No. 4, Richmond, California. The arc welder's blue flames danced across steel plates as another escort carrier took shape on the ways. Foreman Jack Morrison checked his stopwatch. Hull assembly time, 18 days. What none of the 15,000 workers streaming through the yard gates knew was that this single facility would soon be launching more aircraft carriers per month than the entire Japanese empire could produce in a year. The industrial miracle unfolding in American shipyards would reshape naval warfare forever, turning the tide of the Pacific War through sheer manufacturing might that Japan could never hope to match. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pearl Harbor's oil-stained waters as Admiral Chester Nimitz studied the latest intelligence reports from the Office of Naval Intelligence. Japanese carrier strength stood at 25 operational flattops, a formidable force that had dominated the Pacific since December 7, 1941. But buried in the production statistics lay a different story, one that would determine the war's outcome through mathematics as brutal as any naval battle. Commander William Halsey, Jr., recently promoted to oversee carrier operations planning, spread the classified documents across the mahogany table in Nimitz's headquarters. The numbers told a stark tale of industrial capacity. Japan's Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, and Yokosuka naval arsenal facilities combined could complete approximately one fleet carrier every 8 months under optimal conditions. American shipyards, meanwhile, were preparing to launch escort carriers at a rate that defied all previous maritime construction experience. The technological revolution began with Henry Kaiser's radical approach to shipbuilding. Traditional naval construction required years of careful craftsmanship, with each vessel hand-fitted by master shipwrights whose skills had been passed down through generations. Kaiser's industrial engineers had analyzed every aspect of carrier construction and reduced the process to standardized modules that could be mass-produced using assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing. At the Richmond shipyard, Chief Naval Architect Robert McNamara had redesigned the entire construction process around speed and efficiency. Instead of building carriers from the keel up in traditional fashion, his teams fabricated hull sections in parallel, using prefabricated components that could be installed with mechanical precision. Welding replaced riveting wherever possible, reducing assembly time from months to weeks. The Casablanca-class escort carrier represented American industrial philosophy at its most pragmatic. Displacing 10,900 tons when fully loaded, these vessels sacrificed speed and armor for rapid construction and operational flexibility. Their converted merchant vessel hulls could be completed in shipyards that had never built warships, multiplying America's naval construction capacity almost overnight. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Sprague had been assigned to evaluate the first completed escort carrier, USS Bogue, during her initial sea trials in September 1942. Standing on the bridge as the vessel cut through Atlantic swells at 19 knots, Sprague understood that he was witnessing the birth of a new type of warfare. These ships would never match the speed or firepower of fleet carriers like Enterprise or Yorktown, but they could be produced in numbers that would overwhelm any enemy through sheer quantity. The escort carrier's flight deck measured 512 feet in length and 80 feet in width, cramped by fleet carrier standards, but adequate for the Grumman F-4F Wildcats and TBF Avengers that would operate from these platforms. More importantly, the simplified design allowed shipyards to complete hulls using workers with minimal shipbuilding experience, trained in specialized techniques that could be learned in weeks rather than years. Japanese naval construction followed fundamentally different principles. At the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, master shipbuilder Hiroshi Yamamoto supervised the construction of the fleet carrier Taiho, a project that had consumed 3 years and represented the pinnacle of Japanese naval engineering. Each steel plate had been individually fitted, every system handcrafted to exacting standards that ensured maximum performance and survivability. The Taiho displaced 37,720 tons and incorporated advanced features that American carriers lacked: an armored flight deck capable of withstanding direct bomb hits, sophisticated damage control systems, and powerful anti-aircraft batteries designed for extended combat operations. But this technological sophistication came at a devastating cost in construction time and resources. Japanese shipyards could complete perhaps 2 such vessels annually, while American facilities were preparing to launch escort carriers on a weekly schedule. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had recognized this industrial disparity as early as 1940. During classified planning sessions for the Pacific War, Yamamoto had warned the Naval General Staff that Japan's only hope lay in achieving decisive victory within 18 months before American industrial capacity could be fully mobilized. "We can run wild for 6 months or a year, but after that, I have utterly no confidence," he had predicted with chilling accuracy. The mathematical reality was even worse than Yamamoto's pessimistic projections. American steel production in 1942 exceeded Japanese output by a factor of 12 to 1. Aluminum production, critical for aircraft manufacturing, showed a similar disparity. Most critically, American shipyards employed over 2.1 million workers, while Japanese naval construction facilities relied on fewer than 180,000 personnel, who many lacked the specialized skills required for modern warship construction. At the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Captain James Forrestal had been tasked with coordinating the Navy's unprecedented expansion program. His office walls were covered with production charts that told the story of American industrial mobilization in stark numerical terms. In 1941, American shipyards had launched 4 aircraft carriers. The 1943 production schedule called for completion of 53 escort carriers alone, with fleet carrier construction proceeding simultaneously at unprecedented rates. The human dimension of this industrial transformation was equally remarkable. Rose Mitchell had been working as a seamstress in San Francisco when the attack on Pearl Harbor changed her life forever. By March 1942, she was operating a 60-ton crane at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard, installing aircraft elevators on escort carriers with precision that veteran shipbuilders found astounding. Rosie the Riveter became more than wartime propaganda. She represented the mobilization of American society's entire productive capacity. Japanese industry faced constraints that no amount of determination could overcome. The empire's steel-making capacity was limited by coal and iron ore imports that Allied submarines were systematically severing. Aluminum supplies depended on bauxite from the Dutch East Indies, a supply line that grew more precarious with each passing month. Most critically, Japan's skilled workforce was being consumed by military service, leaving shipyards staffed with increasingly inexperienced workers. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant naval aviation tacticians, had calculated the escort carrier threat as early as October 1942. His analysis, presented to the Naval General Staff in classified briefings, painted a sobering picture of Japan's strategic position. American escort carriers could provide air cover for convoy operations, support amphibious assaults, and hunt Japanese submarines with devastating effectiveness. More importantly, they could be produced in sufficient numbers to operate simultaneously across multiple theaters. The first major test of American escort carrier effectiveness came during Operation Torch, the November 1942 invasion of North Africa. USS Ranger, Swanee, Sangamon, and Santee provided air support for Allied forces landing in Morocco and Algeria. These operations demonstrated that escort carriers could perform fleet carrier missions when operating in sufficient numbers, multiplying American naval aviation capabilities far beyond what traditional carrier construction could achieve. Lieutenant Charles Henderson flew a Grumman F-4F Wildcat from USS Swanee's deck during the North African landings, leading a squadron that had been formed specifically for escort carrier operations. The tactics were necessarily different from fleet carrier aviation. shorter-range missions, small and strike packages, but continuous air cover that proved devastatingly effective against Axis forces unprepared for such sustained aerial assault. Japanese naval intelligence had monitored the North African operations with growing alarm. The implications were clear. American industrial capacity was producing not just more carriers, but entirely new types of naval warfare that Japanese strategic planning had never anticipated. Escort carriers could support operations in areas where fleet carriers could not be risked, extending American naval aviation's reach across vast ocean areas. By December 1942, American shipyards had completed their first dozen escort carriers, with production rates accelerating rapidly as assembly line techniques reached full efficiency. The Kaiser shipyards alone had 5 escort carriers under construction simultaneously, using modular assembly methods that reduced completion times to an average of 3 months from keel laying to commissioning. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, had initially been skeptical of escort carrier effectiveness, viewing them as inferior substitutes for fleet carriers. But operational reports from the Atlantic and North African campaigns had changed his perspective dramatically. In classified memos to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, King argued that escort carriers represented a fundamental revolution in naval warfare, allowing concentration of fleet carriers for decisive battle while maintaining air coverage across all operational areas. The production statistics for late 1942 revealed the full scope of American industrial mobilization. Kaiser shipyards had delivered 6 escort carriers, with 12 more scheduled for completion by March 1943. Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding had completed 4 vessels, with 8 additional hulls on the ways. Ingalls Shipbuilding in Mississippi had launched 3 escort carriers, with construction rates improving monthly as workers gained experience with standardized assembly techniques. Japanese production figures told a vastly different story. The Yokosuka Naval Arsenal had completed 1 fleet carrier in 1942, the Yonyo, which had required 14 months to construct using traditional methods. 2 additional carriers were under construction, but completion dates remained uncertain due to steel shortages and worker training problems. The mathematical disparity was becoming overwhelming. Captain Jisaburo Ozawa, one of Japan's most brilliant naval aviation tacticians, had calculated the escort carrier threat as early as October 1942. His analysis, presented to the Naval General Staff in classified briefings, painted a sobering picture of Japan's strategic position. American escort carriers could provide air cover for convoy operations, support amphibious assaults, and hunt Japanese submarines with devastating effectiveness. More importantly, they could be produced in sufficient numbers to operate simultaneously across multiple theaters. The first major test of American escort carrier effectiveness came during Operation Torch, the November 1942 invasion of North Africa. USS Ranger, Swanee, Sangamon, and Santee provided air support for Allied forces landing in Morocco and Algeria. These operations demonstrated that escort carriers could perform fleet carrier missions when operating in sufficient numbers, multiplying American naval aviation capabilities far beyond what traditional carrier construction could achieve. Japanese naval intelligence reports from late 1942 revealed growing alarm about American production capabilities. Agent networks in California had confirmed the existence of multiple escort carrier construction facilities with production rates that seemed to defy logical explanation. The enemy is constructing aircraft carriers as if they were building merchant vessels, using industrial methods that we cannot match with our current facilities. By January 1943, the industrial gap had become a chasm. American shipyards had delivered 22 escort carriers, with production schedules calling for completion of 1 vessel every 2 weeks throughout the year. Japanese facilities, meanwhile, struggled to maintain fleet carrier construction rates of 2 vessels annually, while dealing with increasing material shortages and workforce depletion. The human stories behind these statistics were equally compelling. At the Fore River Shipyard in Massachusetts, welder Mary Catherine Sullivan had become legendary for her speed and precision in joining hull plates. Working 16-hour shifts, Sullivan and her team could complete escort carrier sections that had previously required weeks of careful craftsmanship. "We're not just building ships," she told a war correspondent, "we're building victory, one weld at a time." Admiral Halsey, now commanding the South Pacific Force, had begun incorporating escort carriers into his tactical planning as force multipliers that could extend fleet carrier effectiveness across multiple operational areas. His February 1943 operations order called for escort carriers to provide continuous air patrol coverage while fleet carriers concentrated on offensive strikes against Japanese positions. This tactical innovation would prove decisive in subsequent Pacific campaigns. The technological learning curve was steep but manageable. Captain Frederick Sherman, commanding USS Lexington during early 1943 operations, had observed escort carrier performance with professional interest. "These vessels may not match fleet carrier capabilities in individual performance," Sherman noted in his action reports, "but their combined effectiveness far exceeds the sum of their individual contributions. The enemy must now defend against air attacks from multiple directions simultaneously." Japanese strategic planning was becoming increasingly desperate as the scope of American industrial mobilization became apparent. The February 1943 evacuation of Guadalcanal had been partly necessitated by continuous harassment from escort carrier aircraft that made supply operations virtually impossible during daylight hours. Admiral Yamamoto's staff calculated that effective defense of Japanese positions now required air superiority ratios that could not be maintained against steadily increasing American aviation strength. The production breakthrough came in March 1943 when Kaiser shipyards achieved their target of launching one escort carrier every week. The USS Card slid down the ways on March 15th, followed by USS Core on March 22nd, and USS Block Island on March 29th. This production rate meant that American shipyards were launching more carriers in a single month than Japan could complete in an entire year using conventional construction methods. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, serving aboard USS Bogue during Atlantic convoy operations, had experienced firsthand the escort carrier's unique capabilities. "We're not trying to match the Yorktown or Enterprise," Anderson wrote to his family, "but we can be everywhere they can't be, providing air coverage for operations that would otherwise be impossible." The Germans are learning that American air power now extends across the entire Atlantic Ocean. The psychological impact on Japanese naval planning was devastating. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, hero of Pearl Harbor, had been forced to acknowledge that Japan's carrier advantage was rapidly disappearing through American industrial might rather than battle losses. "We achieved tactical surprise at Pearl Harbor," Nagumo wrote in classified communications, "but the enemy has achieved strategic surprise through production methods we never anticipated." The statistical reality by April 1943 was overwhelming. American shipyards had completed 38 escort carriers, with production accelerating toward a peak rate of one vessel every 5 days. Japanese naval construction, meanwhile, had been reduced to 2 fleet carriers annually, with completion schedules increasingly uncertain due to material shortages and bombing attacks on industrial facilities. Captain Miles Browning, Admiral Spruance's chief of staff, had been analyzing escort carrier tactical applications for upcoming Pacific operations. His planning documents revealed the full scope of American naval aviation's transformation. "We can now provide continuous air coverage for any operation anywhere in the Pacific, while concentrating fleet carriers for decisive engagement with remaining Japanese forces." The industrial statistics told a story of mathematical inevitability. American escort carrier production was consuming steel, aluminum, and other critical materials at rates that dwarfed Japanese industrial capacity even under peacetime conditions. The empire's wartime economy, already strained by global commitments and resource shortages, simply could not compete with American mass production techniques applied to naval construction. Admiral King's April 1943 strategic assessment captured the transformation's significance. The escort carrier program has fundamentally altered the mathematics of Pacific naval warfare. We can now afford tactical losses that would have been catastrophic in 1942, while maintaining overall naval aviation strength that increases monthly regardless of combat attrition. As the first phase of America's industrial mobilization reached full production capacity, the implications for Pacific strategy were becoming clear. Japanese naval aviation, which had dominated the early war through superior tactics and experienced pilots, now faced an opponent whose numerical advantages were growing exponentially through production methods that Japan could neither match nor counter. The stage was set for a confrontation between Japanese naval excellence and American industrial might, a contest that would determine not just the outcome of individual battles, but the future of naval warfare itself. In shipyards across America, the tools of victory were taking shape on assembly lines that operated around the clock, building the foundation for campaigns that would carry American naval power across the Pacific to Japan's home waters. The turning point came on May 15, 1943, when Japanese naval intelligence intercepted American radio transmissions, revealing the true scope of escort carrier production. Cryptographer Lieutenant Takeshi Nakamura, working in the basement of the Naval Ministry in Tokyo, had decoded a routine logistics message that contained a devastating revelation. The Americans weren't just building escort carriers, they were planning to operate them in coordinated task groups that would blanket the Pacific with air coverage from over 100 vessels. Admiral Yamamoto's reaction to this intelligence was swift and desperate. During an emergency strategy conference aboard the battleship Yamato, he outlined Japan's only remaining option, Operation Mi-2, a massive carrier strike designed to destroy American escort carrier concentrations before they could achieve full operational deployment. "We must sink these vessels faster than they can be replaced," Yamamoto declared to his assembled commanders, "or accept that the war is mathematically lost." The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel was equally devastating. Captain Taimon Yamaguchi, commanding the carrier Soryu, had studied American production reports with growing despair. His pilots were among the most experienced in the Imperial Navy, veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean raids, and countless Pacific battles. But experience meant nothing against opponents who could replace losses through industrial production that Japan could never match. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading naval ace with 64 confirmed kills, had encountered American escort carrier aircraft during operations near Guadalcanal. His combat reports painted a sobering picture of American tactical evolution. "The enemy pilots are not yet our equals in individual skill," Sakai reported, "but their aircraft are newer, their tactics are improving rapidly, and most critically, there are always more of them. We shoot down 5 Wildcats and 10 appear the next day." The mathematical reality was even worse than Japanese strategists realized. American escort carrier production had achieved Henry Kaiser's impossible goal of 1 vessel every 5 days, with multiple shipyards operating simultaneously. By June 1943, 47 escort carriers had been completed, with another 36 under construction at various stages. Japanese naval construction, meanwhile, had been reduced to emergency repairs and conversion of existing merchant vessels. At the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Captain John McCain Sr. had been tasked with developing tactical doctrines for escort carrier operations in the Central Pacific. His planning documents revealed the full scope of American naval aviation's transformation. Task groups built around escort carriers could provide air coverage for amphibious operations, while fleet carriers concentrated on offensive strikes against Japanese positions. The enemy would face simultaneous attacks from multiple directions with no possibility of concentrating defensive forces. The human dimension of America's industrial mobilization continued expanding at unprecedented rates. At the Bethlehem Steel Shipyard in Baltimore, night shift supervisor Frank Thompson was overseeing the completion of 3 escort carriers simultaneously.
His workforce of 8,000 included welders, fitters, electricians, and engineers who had been farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers 18 months earlier. We're not just building ships, we're rebuilding America's relationship with the sea, Thompson told visiting Navy inspectors. Japanese industry faced constraints that no amount of determination could overcome. The June 1943 Strategic Materials Assessment revealed critical shortages in every category essential for naval construction. Steel production had fallen to 60% of 1941 levels due to coal shortages and transportation disruptions. Aluminum supplies were nearly exhausted, forcing designers to substitute steel in aircraft construction, adding weight and reducing performance. Most critically, the skilled workforce was being consumed by military conscription and bombing attacks on industrial facilities. Admiral Chuichi Nagamo, commanding the 3rd Carrier Division, had been forced to acknowledge that Japanese tactical advantages were being overwhelmed by American numerical superiority. During classified strategy sessions, Nagamo presented calculations showing that Japanese carrier aviation would be operationally extinct within 12 months unless decisive action could reverse current trends. We are fighting an enemy whose industrial capacity increases faster than our ability to inflict damage, his analysis concluded. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 provided the first large-scale test of American escort carrier effectiveness in major naval combat. Task Force 58, under Admiral Mark Mitcher, included 15 escort carriers operating alongside 7 fleet carriers. This concentration of American naval aviation represented more aircraft than Japan could deploy in the entire Pacific theater, supported by escort carriers that could maintain continuous operations while fleet carriers conducted offensive strikes against Japanese positions. Lieutenant Richard Best, flying a Douglas SBD Dauntless from USS Kalinin Bay, participated in the massive air battles that Japanese pilots would remember as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The tactical situation was unlike anything previously seen in naval aviation. American pilots had numerical superiority so overwhelming that Japanese formations were attacked simultaneously from multiple directions, making coordinated defense impossible. The escort carriers proved their worth beyond all expectations during the Philippine Sea operations. USS Fanshawe Bay, Kalinin Bay, White Plains, and 8 other escort carriers maintained continuous air patrols while launching strikes against Japanese positions on Saipan and Guam. Their aircraft flew 1,200 sorties over 4 days, providing air coverage for amphibious operations while simultaneously hunting Japanese submarines and conducting anti-shipping patrols. Japanese pilot Lieutenant Zenji Abe, one of the few survivors of Carrier Division 2, had witnessed the destruction of Japanese naval aviation from the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0. His post-battle report described the psychological impact of facing seemingly unlimited American aircraft. We would engage one formation and destroy several enemy planes, only to discover that 3 more formations were attacking from different directions. The Americans had achieved what we thought impossible. They had made carrier aviation into mass warfare. The production statistics from mid-1944 revealed the full scope of American industrial dominance. Escort carrier completions had reached Kaiser's theoretical maximum of 1 vessel every 3 days, with 78 vessels operational and another 45 under construction. Japanese naval aviation, by contrast, had been reduced to fewer than 300 operational aircraft distributed among 6 remaining carriers. The numerical disparity was approaching 20-1 in America's favor.
Captain Joseph Reeves, commanding Escort Carrier Division 26, had developed the tactical innovations that made mass carrier operations possible. His formation flying techniques allowed escort carriers to coordinate strikes with fleet carriers while maintaining defensive air patrols over invasion beaches. The escort carrier has become the foundation of American naval aviation, Reeves reported to Admiral King, providing the numerical strength that allows fleet carriers to concentrate on offensive operations. The psychological warfare aspect was equally important. American radio broadcasts to Japanese positions emphasized the unstoppable nature of escort carrier production. Every week, American shipyards launch another aircraft carrier, announced Tokyo Rose's counterpart, while Japanese workers build hope from empty promises. These broadcasts, monitored by Japanese intelligence, revealed growing awareness among enemy personnel that they faced industrial capacity beyond imagination. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Yamamoto's successor as commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, had inherited an impossible strategic situation. His July 1944 assessment of Japanese naval capabilities painted a desperate picture. Fuel shortages limited carrier operations to emergency sorties. Pilot training programs had been reduced to bare minimums due to aircraft and fuel shortages. Most critically, American escort carrier groups were appearing simultaneously across multiple Pacific theaters, making coordinated Japanese defense impossible. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 became the funeral pyre of Japanese naval aviation. Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet included 18 escort carriers operating alongside 8 fleet carriers, a concentration of American naval aviation that represented more aircraft than Japan had deployed during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The mathematical impossibility of Japanese victory was demonstrated through 4 days of continuous air combat that eliminated the remnants of enemy naval aviation as an effective fighting force. During the Leyte operations, USS St. Lo, Kalinin Day, Fanshawe Bay, and other escort carriers faced the ultimate test when Admiral Takeo Kurita's surface fleet attacked the escort carrier groups directly. The battle off Samar became legendary for the courage of American sailors who faced battleships and heavy cruisers with destroyer escorts and aircraft armed primarily for ground support missions. But the tactical significance lay in the fact that escort carriers could absorb such losses while maintaining overall operational capability through numerical superiority. Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans, commanding the destroyer USS Johnston during the Samar action, had radioed a message that captured the essence of American industrial warfare. "We're not trying to win this battle through individual heroism," Evans transmitted as his ship attacked Japanese battleships. "We're winning through the mathematical certainty that you cannot sink ships faster than we can build them." The kamikaze campaigns of late 1944 represented Japan's final attempt to offset American numerical advantages through tactical desperation. Escort carriers, with their thin hulls and minimal armor, seemed particularly vulnerable to suicide attacks. USS St. Lo became the first major warship sunk by kamikaze attack during the Leyte operations, but her loss was immediately compensated by additional escort carriers arriving from American shipyards at the rate of 3 per week. Admiral Clifton Spragg, commanding the Escort Carrier Task Group at Samar, had experienced the full range of naval combat from submarine attacks to kamikaze strikes. His after-action reports emphasized the psychological impact of continuous reinforcement. "The enemy can achieve tactical success," Spragg noted, "but strategic victory requires sinking our ships faster than American industry can replace them, which has proven mathematically impossible." By December 1944, American escort carrier production had reached 110 vessels completed, with the final 31 under construction or in planning stages. The original goal of 141 escort carriers was becoming reality through industrial methods that had transformed naval warfare from a contest of individual ship capabilities to mass production logistics. Japanese naval construction, meanwhile, had been reduced to converting merchant vessels and fishing boats for desperate defensive missions. The human stories behind these statistics revealed the true scope of American mobilization. At the Kaiser shipyards, Supervisor Mary Williams was overseeing the completion of the final escort carriers in the program. Her workforce included 20,000 employees working 3 shifts around the clock using assembly line techniques that had reduced construction time to an average of 45 days from keel laying to commissioning. "We've built more aircraft carriers in 3 years than the rest of the world combined in the previous 50 years, Williams told a war correspondent. Admiral King's final assessment of the escort carrier program, delivered to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in January 1945, captured the strategic transformation. "These vessels have fundamentally altered the mathematics of naval warfare. We can now provide air coverage for simultaneous operations across the entire Pacific theater while maintaining fleet carrier concentrations for offensive strikes against Japan itself." The technological innovations had proven equally significant. Electric welding techniques developed for escort carrier construction were being applied to fleet carrier and battleship construction, reducing completion times across all categories of naval vessels. Prefabricated assembly methods allowed inland manufacturing facilities to contribute to naval construction, multiplying America's shipbuilding capacity by factors that Japanese intelligence had never anticipated. Japanese strategic planning by early 1945 was forced to acknowledge mathematical reality. Admiral Toyoda's final carrier operation plan called for using remaining aircraft in coordinated kamikaze attacks against American invasion fleets, accepting that conventional naval aviation was no longer possible given American numerical superiority. The escort carriers' contribution to the final Pacific campaigns was definitive. During the Iwo Jima operations, 12 escort carriers provided continuous air support while fleet carriers struck Japanese airfields on Honshu. The Okinawa campaign saw 14 escort carriers maintaining air coverage for 82 consecutive days, flying 8,400 sorties while absorbing kamikaze attacks that would have been devastating to smaller air forces. Captain Frederick Sherman, now commanding a task group that included both fleet and escort carriers, had observed the evolution of American naval aviation from Pearl Harbor through the approaches to Japan. His analysis captured the transformation's significance. "The escort carrier program has given us the numerical strength to absorb tactical defeats while maintaining strategic momentum. The enemy achieved surprise at Pearl Harbor, but we achieved strategic surprise through production methods they could never match." The psychological impact on Japanese military leadership was complete by mid-1945. Emperor Hirohito's decision to surrender was influenced partly by naval staff assessments, showing that American escort carrier production would continue at current rates throughout 1946, making defense of the home islands impossible against air attacks from over 140 aircraft carriers operating simultaneously. The final escort carrier, USS Munda, was completed at the Kaiser shipyards on July 15, 1945, bringing total production to 122 vessels actually commissioned for naval service. An additional 19 hulls were canceled following Japan's surrender, but the industrial achievement was complete. American shipyards had produced more aircraft carriers in 4 years than all other nations combined in naval history. The mathematical comparison was stark and final. Japan had begun World War II with 10 aircraft carriers and completed 15 additional vessels during the conflict, for a total of 25 carriers. The United States had launched 141 escort carriers alone, plus 24 fleet carriers, for a combined total of 165 aircraft carriers completed during the war years. The numerical ratio of nearly 7-to-1 represented industrial dominance that made Japanese naval victory mathematically impossible. Admiral Nimitz's victory assessment, delivered aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, acknowledged the escort carrier program's decisive contribution. These vessels represented more than naval construction. They demonstrated American society's ability to mobilize industrial resources on a scale that our enemies could neither match nor comprehend. Victory was achieved not through individual battles, but through the mathematical certainty that democratic industrial capacity would overwhelm authoritarian military excellence. The escort carriers' legacy extended far beyond World War II statistics. Their mass production techniques revolutionized naval construction methods, leading to standardized designs and assembly line processes that would define Cold War shipbuilding. More importantly, they had proven that numerical superiority achieved through industrial mobilization could overcome tactical excellence and individual heroism. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the remnants of Japanese naval aviation rested on the seafloor, victims not of superior American seamanship or tactical innovation, but of industrial warfare that had transformed naval combat from individual ship duels to mass production contests. The escort carriers had won through mathematics as brutal as any naval battle, proving that in modern warfare, victory belonged to the side capable of building weapons faster than enemies could destroy them. The final accounting was definitive. Japan had built 25 carriers and lost the Pacific War. America had launched 141 escort carriers and reshaped naval warfare forever. The difference was not courage, determination, or tactical skill. It was the industrial might of a democratic society fully mobilized for total war.